Hi everyone. Today I'm going to demonstrate how to make a flow diagram for a game idea. This is an important step in the game design process to help you decide how a user will move through your game experience. For this demonstration, I will be focusing on how the user navigates the UI of the game, including buttons, menus, and pop-ups, but flow diagrams can also be used to show different aspects of game progression. I'll be using Drawio for the first part of this tutorial, and then I will show how you can also use Figma for the same process. We will not be worrying about the layout of how things will be placed on the screen. Right now what we are concerned with is how the user accesses the different screens. Before starting a flow diagram, we need a game idea, and we should be able to explain the idea in a 30-second elevator pitch. I would recommend pausing the video now to think of an idea you will use while following the rest of the demonstration. I'm going to use a game idea that I've used in previous tutorials about a robot puppy who is trying to escape from a house. So the user controls a robot puppy who can navigate around in a space and tries to complete quests and solve puzzles and defeat enemies. So now let's get into Draw.io. I'm going to create a new flow diagram and I'll call it Game UI Flow, and I will choose blank diagram and then I will choose create. So here I have a blank diagram, and the first thing I want to do is I want to think about what happens when the player first launches the game. Well, most games start with a start screen, and a start screen usually has a few different buttons. I'm going to use the rounded rectangle here for my buttons. And so what are some buttons we might have on our start screen? Well, most start screens have a start button, so it actually launches the game. Generally, start screens also contain a menu button for some different options. So I'm going to use Control D to duplicate, or Command D on a Mac. And I'm going to say the second button is going to be Options. And then if it's a PC game, we probably want to have an exit button. One thing I will say here is this does depend on the platform that you are on. For example, if you are making a mobile game, an exit button is not only uncommon, but actually discouraged by both Apple and Google. So the exit button, it makes sense for a PC game, but it would not make sense for a mobile game. It's important to think about what platform you are developing this for, even at this early stage of coming up with your flow diagram. So this makes sense for some of my start screen buttons. And so now I'm going to think about what would the user normally do from this screen. So there's a couple of different things that they might do. They might press the start button, and I would expect this to take them to another screen. I'm going to Control D to duplicate this, and we don't really care about what size the screen window is for this part of the process because we are not concerned about the layout. We're only concerned how does the user get from one screen to another. So what happens when the user presses the start button? Well, instinctively we might think, okay, so the game just starts. But that's not usually what happens. Usually after the start button, there is another screen for a couple of different things that might happen here. So we might have a game where the user can save their progression, and so then they would want to have an option to load from different saves. Another thing that might happen here is we might have some kind of character customization. So I'm going to go ahead and do both of these options. So I'm going to say from the start button, I'm going to grab one of these little X's here and drag my arrow out. And I'm going to say that the user has the ability to save progress throughout the game. So I'm going to copy one of these buttons just to make sure that it's the same size. Bring it over here. So I'm going to say they can choose New Game or Load Game. So these are the two options they might have. So they press the start button, they come to this screen, they choose a new game or a load game. If they choose a new game, I'm going to say that they want to be able to customize their character. So I'm going to duplicate my screen again. You'll notice in Draw.io when you reach the edge of the grid, it will extend your grid so you can keep going. So they choose new game, and then here's where they would be able to customize their character. And I'm not sure exactly what buttons I'll have on this screen, and I don't need to get too detailed with this yet because I'm not worried about how the screen is going to look, but what I am worried about is if anything on this screen takes the user to a new screen. So I'm just going to put this little character icon here and oops. If you double click on the character, you can adjust the text. I'm going to change this to say character customization. And I'm going to say probably there's a button after they customize their character that will allow them to accept that character and move on into the game. So I'm going to duplicate one of my previous buttons again. And I don't know exactly what I want to call this button. I might use accept, or I might use start game or something like that. So I can give some more thought to what I would want to call this button. It might be a good chance to look at some character customization screens in some games that I enjoy playing and see what they normally use for this button. But there's always a button to complete the character customization and to move on into the game. Now, if the user chooses load game, I don't know if I want them to actually go to the character customization screen. I don't think it makes sense for them to customize their character if they're loading a game because they've already created a character. So instead, I'm going to say the load game button takes them directly into the game. So I'm going to duplicate this again, and this will be my gameplay window. And so if they choose load game, this will take them into the gameplay window. And if you ever get this issue where the lines kind of overlap, you can drag, if you click on with the arrows here like this, you can drag the line so that it doesn't overlap with the edge. So this is going to be my game window. And I'm going to say also that when the user is done customizing their character, that would take them to this screen as well. Now I don't know where I'm going to put different UI elements on this screen yet, but again, I'm not worried about the layout. I'm only worried about the progression. So from the game view, I wonder if there's anything that the user might press that would open up any other menus or screens. A lot of games will have some kind of pause menu. Sometimes you get to it by pressing escape. Sometimes you get to it by pressing a button that's in the top corner. So I'm going to say when the user presses escape. And to indicate that this is not a button, I'm going to use this little diamond. And I'm just going to type ESC for escape. So I'm going to say this is representative of not a button on the screen, but a keyboard press. And it's important to think about if the user can press a key on the keyboard to change screens so that you have that marked in your flow diagram. So the user presses escape, and this maybe takes me to some kind of options pop-up. And I also have this options button here. And so an important consideration might be, do I want to have them go to the same pop-up, or would this options menu be different from this options menu? Some games, there are options you can change from the start screen that you cannot change during gameplay. And in some cases, this is a physical limitation of the hardware. For example, there are some graphics settings that you cannot change while the game is running. So let's say I'm going to make another screen here, and this will be my options menu, and I might have multiple sub options menus here. So I'm going to bring my button down here. What are some common options that we have in games? Well, graphics, that's one. Some other options, we might have controls. So maybe I have a way for the user to remap the controls. This is particularly important for usability. So if you want the user to be able to change their keyboard layout or their mouse layout, that's a good idea to have that there. And maybe I might even have some kind of difficulty settings. I don't need to be too specific at this point. I just want a basic idea of the different options, the different sub options menus I might be able to go to. So I would then need to create a screen for each of these because each of these is going to take me to a new screen. I'm just going to show one for example, but this would be my graphics settings screen. And I would need a way to go back. So once I'm on this submenu, it's very important. Any screen that you can get to, you need a way to get out of it. So let me duplicate one of my buttons again. And this will be my back button, which will take me back to this options menu. It's really important that if you can get to a menu, you need to be able to get back out of the menu. So this options button takes me to this screen, and I'm going to just adjust my lines a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and do some visual cleanup right now to make this just a little bit easier to see. So I'm going to select all of my arrows. I'm just holding Control to select multiple, and I'm going to change the color to blue, and I'm going to increase the line size. Oops. Sorry, this line size right here. So now my arrows are a lot easier to see. So just like I did with the graphics settings, I would want to do that for controls and difficulty, so I would just want to replicate that process. Let me think about the other things that I need to do here. So from the escape option, I might want to take to this options menu, or I might want a separate options menu that is specifically for the in-game options. So I'm going to duplicate this, and I'm going to take my escape arrow and bring it down here. So the user presses escape and it takes them to this menu. So maybe during the game, I probably don't want them to change the difficulty while they're playing, but I might still have some graphics and controls options. So I'm going to duplicate these two down here. And from this escape menu option, I probably also want a way for the user to either get back to the main menu or exit the game. So I'm going to have a button for main menu. So this escape option will pop up an in-game menu that will allow them to change some graphics. It probably is a different graphics menu than this one because, like I said, some graphics settings you cannot change during gameplay. And then I'll have the main menu button, which will take me back to the main menu. And then I'm going to adjust my arrows so that it doesn't overlap other things. So we're starting to see how the game is going to flow. So I now have a full loop that I can go through. So the user presses start, then they choose a new game, they customize their character, they go into the game view, they press escape, then they press main menu, and they're back to the beginning. So basically everything should eventually loop back. So this one here, this has a loop within here, and I have a slight problem here where I don't have a way for the user to get back from this menu. So this is one of those things where it's really important that you think about how is the user going to move back. So they get into this options menu here. How do they get back to this main menu? So I'm going to add another button, and this will be my back button. If you ever are not sure how to get the user back from something, most likely you need to have a back button. So now I have this loop here. So the user presses options, they get into the options menu, maybe they go into graphics, they change some graphics settings, they come back here, and then they go back to the start screen. So now everything I have on here has a way to progress and get through a full loop. And I probably will need to think of some other things that might pop up in between these. So maybe some confirmation screens. In particular, if the user presses exit, this is the most common place where we would have a confirmation screen. So I'm going to go ahead and do that one. So the user presses exit, and now we need a confirmation screen. So a confirmation screen would just have yes and no. And the text I would have on here, I'm going to go ahead and put a text object here. And I would say, are you sure? Another common place to have a confirmation screen is if you have the ability to delete previous saves. So right now I basically have this set up so I can only load a single save file. But let's say I have multiple save files. Then this line here does not make sense. So I'm going to delete this one. If I press the load game button and I have multiple saves, I need to go to a separate screen where I have different saves to choose from. So I'm going to bring this arrow up here. And this is where I can choose different saves. So maybe I have save 1 and save 2. And save 3. And this might be something where I actually populate this list based on how many games they've actually saved. So this is just for an example. Now, let's say I have the ability to delete saves. So the user chooses save 1, and this maybe when they click on save 1, I have two options here where they can load this save or they can delete this save. Now, if they delete the save, I definitely want a confirmation screen. So I'm going to take this whole confirmation screen that I have here and duplicate it, bring it over here. And choose from this delete here and bring my arrow over. And so now I have this, are you sure? And whether they say yes or no, I am actually going to bring them back to this save screen here. So they choose a save. They choose delete. If they say yes or no, I will take them back to my save, my loading screen here. I probably would have something pop up to let them know that they deleted the game. So I might have a brief pop up right here that says save deleted, that maybe just would briefly pop up on the screen to let them know what happened. Now, alternatively, if they choose load, now this is where they would enter the game screen. And I'm going to bring this arrow out and around so that it's not over the top of too many other things. Now, whenever you have overlap like this, it's a good idea to try to, as best you can, clean up your arrows so that they don't overlap. So I'm going to take this arrow down here instead and bring this over here. So now the escape arrow does not overlap from this load arrow. So now I have reconnected all of my loops so that if the user chooses load, they come to select their save. They choose if they want to load their save, they come down and start playing the game. If they choose to delete their game, they get a pop-up confirmation, and then it brings them back to the list of saves. So this gives you an example of how you can make a flow diagram to show how the user progresses through multiple different screens. A couple of things that's important to remember is to make sure that if a user can get to a screen, that they always can get back out of the screen. And if you have something where you want to give the user a chance to change their mind, you want to make sure that you use a confirmation screen. Now I'm going to just briefly show how you can do this same process in Figma. So I have logged into my Figma page and I'm going to hit the plus next to drafts to make a new file. And this process is going to be very similar, and I'm not going to go all the way through it. I'm just going to show the things that Figma can do and how you would do those things. So in Figma, we have these frames, which represent different screens. And this is probably the best way to approach this type of flow diagram, is to use frames. So I'm going to make my first frame. This is going to be my start screen. If you double click where it says frame 1, you can rename it. So this will be my start screen. And then I will use a shape to draw my buttons. And I would use the text button here to add text to this button. And I would make basically the same buttons that I made in my flow diagram in Draw.io. Now I can rearrange things in this list here. I can take things in and out of the frames. And if you bring something below another thing, it actually puts it behind it, just like what you would have with Photoshop. So I have my start button, and I could select both of these and duplicate them. And this would be my options button. And duplicate one more time, and then, oops. And then this third one would be my exit button. And now the way that this would be slightly different in Figma is we would make another frame. I can duplicate this frame actually. And this second one would be, let's say this one is my load screen. And so here I have my options to have a new game, or load game. And I didn't do this in my previous one, but it might even be helpful to have a back button here, which would take me back to the start screen. So then I'm going to duplicate this frame one more time, and this would be my customization screen. And I'm going to delete some of these buttons. And I say this is my confirm button. And I might want to put a shape here just to represent that something goes on the screen, something visual goes on the screen to show the customization of the character. And I didn't do this in the previous one, but I also might want to do a back button here. So I'm going to duplicate this and change this to say back. And now I'm ready to start connecting some of these with arrows, just like we did with our flow diagram in Draw.io. So I'm going to switch to the prototype tab, which lets us show how different things are connected. So I'm going to say when they press the start button, takes them to this screen here. And then from this screen, when they press new game, it brings them to this screen. If they choose back here, it would bring them back to the start screen. And I have a little bit of arrow overlap here, but that's okay because I can still kind of tell what's going on. And the other thing that I want is this back button should be able to take me back to this screen. So the cool thing about Figma is when you are drawing your arrows to show where different things go, you can actually test it as if you were actually playing the game. So if I hit present here, then I can press my button. So it starts on the first one that I created, and then I press start, takes me to, this is my my screen where I can choose if I want to make a new game or a load game, and I can go back. I didn't drag the load game to go anywhere, so I can't actually click on this one. If you click on something you can't click on, it actually highlights the things that you can click on. So if I choose new game, now I'm on my character customization screen. If I hit back, it takes me back to my load screen. And if I hit back again, it brings me back to my main menu. Now it doesn't show me up in the top the name of the screen that I'm on. So if I'm using Figma, I would actually want to add text to the top to say what each of these screens is. So this would be my start screen. And I'm going to switch back to design instead of prototype, so it removes the arrows. So this would be my start screen. And I'm going to duplicate it, Control D to duplicate. And this would be my load screen. And then duplicate one more time. And when you're dragging these around, it actually is reassigning them to the correct frame based on where you have dragged it to. So this would be my character customization. So now you can get a sense of how you could do the same process using Figma. I'm not going to walk through all of the screens that I previously made in my Draw.io diagram, but you get the idea of how you can do this same process using Figma. And the cool thing that Figma lets you do is it lets you actually test your flow diagram so you can see how you would progress through the different screens. This can be really helpful to help you catch issues. So you might be clicking through the screens and you might realize that you can get to a screen that you can't get out of. And if you get to a screen you can't get out of, then you know that you need another button, probably a back button. Hope you found this helpful for creating flow diagrams for your game ideas.